Good morning, Morai Rabotai. We are continuing on Masechet Avodah Zarah, and we are on Daf Yud Chet, Amud Bet, the first white line. We really completed the story of Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion and his daughter, the sister-in-law of Rabbi Meir, who was married to Bruria, another daughter of Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion. We mentioned many stories about the Ishiyut, the personality of Bruria, probably known as the smartest, most learned woman in the entire Shas Bafli, that you find a tremendous personality of Torah. Gemara says that he learned 300 halachot from 300 chachamim every day, which again the Marsha writes in a different place that 300 usually is the Lashon Guzma, but she was in contact constantly with Chachmei Israel, and she was a tremendous person. Gemara says, and she was also very sharp. She did not take any nonsensical thing, even from the Gdolei Israel. The Gemara says Rabbi Yossi Galili once asked her, "Ve'eze derech nelech lelod," right? From which path we should take to go to the city of Lod? And she said, "Galili shoteh." Says, "You're crazy. You don't talk to a woman extra words. You could have said, "Ve'eze lelod en marbin sichai ma'isha." Right? She was a very strong personality, and you find her giving musar to Rabbi Meir, to different chachamim, to different talmidei chachamim. Tremendous personality. We spoke about her a little bit yesterday in the Gemara, in different places, and also in midrashic works. We spoke about the story of Beruria that's brought in Midrash Rabban and Mishlei, when he talks about Eshet Chayil, who is written by Shlomo HaMelech, actually about his mother's, the last chapter of Mishlei. Eshet Chayil mi imsa, who is a woman of valor, says the Midrash, Zu Beruria. It's Beruria. Beruria is a tremendous personality of Torah, and yet we have this peculiar Rashi that speaks about the death of Bruria, which is extremely bizarre, both in the fact that Rabbi Meir, we'll say it again what it says, the Rashi brings, which doesn't really have any source that I know in Gemaras or Midrashim, Zohar HaKadosh, Yerushalmi. It seems to have been something that Rashi just says, seemingly from what he heard. So says Rashi, the Gemara who says Rabbi Meir ran away to Bavel from Eretz Israel because of Maaseh de Beruria, the story that happened to Beruria. Well, the Gemara first says it was because he had the target on his back because he betrayed the Gezardin, the psak of the Roman government, and now he was wanted. And Gemara says either that or Maaseh de Beruria that caused him to go to Bavel. Rashi says, I'll tell you what Maaseh Beruria is. Beruria had a very strong personality, as we mentioned, and there's one thing that she made fun of. Liglega. She mocked one of the words of Chachamim, which you should never be doing, right? Even if your name is Bruria, you should not be doing that. And she said, what? Gemara says in Masachet Kiddushin, Daf Pei Amud Bet, Nashim datan kalot. The women, they have light, they're easily swayed. Now, Bruria, of course, was not easily swayed. And she did not like this, as if it's a disrespect to Nashim. Right? The Shalshelet HaKabbalah, Sefer Shalshelet HaKabbalah actually writes, says Beruria authored her own Sefer. And in her Sefer, she quoted this Chazal saying, Nashim da'atan kalot chutz mi Beruria. Says, all the Nashim are da'atan kalot aside from myself. Well, that is a very dangerous thing. Who else do we know that did such a thing? Shlomo HaMelech. Shlomo HaMelech was a king. It says in the Torah, Lo yarbe lo susim, lo yarbe lo nashim, right? He should not marry a lot of wives, don't have a lot of horses, right? Kesef v'zahav lo yarbe lo, and shouldn't have a lot of money. And Shlomo HaMelech said, the reason in the Chumash it says because his heart is going to be swayed from the path of Hashem. That's why you shouldn't have all of these things. But me, Shlomo HaMelech was the wisest man ever, right? The pasuk, you take a look at the psukim in Perek Hey Vav Zayin of the beginning of Sefer Melachim Aleph, tremendous, right? He was really smart. The psukim say all the kings of far and near will come to just see Chochmat Shlomo. He was tremendous. So he said, the challenge that comes with that, sometimes you could think and it gets through your head that you are above the law. And Shlomo HaMelech actually felt like that. Instead of saying lo yarbe, he shouldn't add, he shouldn't increase, right? Susim, wives, and so on. He switched the place of the yud and the aleph. Instead of saying lo yarbe, he said li arbe. For me, I could do a lot. I'm not challenged with the regular person's, inabilities, and the framework of other people does not necessarily limit me. And therefore, he said, and the pasuk says exactly that Nashav, his wives, he tu et levavo, they swayed his heart. And Shlomo HaMelech lost the malchut, even though that he was a tzaddik and so on, but he lost the chain, the eternal chain of David HaMelech as being the king. David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kam was broken and destroyed because of Shlomo HaMelech. So here we find and his mother used to give him musar, right? The Bathsheba used to give him musar, and that's the whole thing of the last two prakim of Mishlei. So it says, Shalshelet HaKabbalah, she also made the same mistake. Shalshelet HaKabbalah is one of the Kadmonim. He says, Beruria wrote in her Sefer, Tashim dartan kalot, chutz mi Beruria. Aside from myself. Now, what is the problem? Now, first of all, let's explain this, because several people after shiur yesterday asked me to explain this a little bit more, because their image of Rabbi Meir was smudged a little bit in their minds. So first and foremost, this is the beauty of the Gemara. The Gemara speaks the truth, regardless of who is the subject of the truth. The Gemara actually says about, in Masechet Kiddushin, Daf Be'alef, the Gemara talks about tremendous figures of Torah, including Rabbi Meir himself, actually. Rabbi Meir, the Gemara says, used to make fun of Ovrei Avera, and Hashem tested him with Satan looking like a beautiful, beautiful woman, and he was an old man, Rabbi Meir, and still he was nitpateh. He was swayed by the Yetzer Hara and started passing a river that didn't have a bridge with a rope to go to the other side, and then midway the Satan let go of him and said, if it wasn't because you're Rabbi Meir, that every day there is a cruise, there is a announcement in Shamayim, Hizaru mipnei Meir beni v'torato, be careful with Rabbi Meir, my son, and his Torah. If it wasn't because of your zchuyot, I would have made you look like 2 cents. I would have destroyed you, said the Yetzer Hara to him. Same exact thing happened with Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva went up a tree, because he also used to make fun of people. Oh, what are you doing? Averot, for what? You after Arayot and so on. And the Gemara says, Hashem tested him. Said, oh, really? Al ta'amin ba'atzmecha ad yom motcha. Do not trust yourself until the day you're alive. Even though that he was old and he was this, the Gemara says he almost fell for it. And at last moment, Yetzer Hara shows himself and says, oh, if it wasn't because you're Rabbi Akiva, I would have destroyed you. Right? So you find this, and Rambam writes, Rav Chia bar Ashi, the Gemara says he actually, something happened, his own wife tried to test him, and so on. And Rambam writes in L'chod Yisurei B'ya Perek Chaf Aleph, you think the Gemara likes to say Lashon Hara? Well, why is the Gemara talk about this Gedolei Tanaim and Amoraim? You're kidding? And says the Rambam, they were open about it themselves because they wanted to impress upon us They wanted us to realize there is no exception. And the intellectual honesty of the Gemara is something to actually be, marvel at, because there is no one above the law, so to speak. You speak it the way it is because people for generations to come have to learn from it. And if it was a mistake, it was a mistake. So we mentioned yesterday the tshuva of the Shoel U'Mashiv in Chelek Bet Siman Kuf Yud Aleph. The Shoel U'Mashiv was asked, the Yaakov was asked in Chelek Bet of his tshuvot about a person who was mezanev the Eshed Ish, and he wanted to kill himself, literally to kill himself as a means of tshuva. And he asked him, is it mutar? I want to kill myself. My life is, so horrible I feel about the averot that I did. I want as a tikkun, as atonement, I want to kill myself, right? So he actually takes this she'ela seriously, goes through all the sources in Shas, and one of them is this. One of the sources that we have is this. One of them is the 400 pairs of young boys and girls who were taken by Titos by the Romans to do Avera, and on the way they drowned themselves. And the other one is the case of Rabbi Elazar ben Durdaya, that he also died through tshuva, and the Shuvot Yaakov says none of them is a reason. Rabbi Elazar ben Durdaya did not kill himself; he died from agony. Those kids, they were afraid because they're afraid they're going to do averot. It's not a part of tshuva. They just were unsure of themselves whether or not they could withstand the nisayon of being pushed to do an avera, being tortured to do an avera. So they said we don't want the nisayon, right? And that's the whole sugya in Masechet Sanhedrin and Daf Ayin Dalet, whether a person could kill himself in order to prevent himself from doing high-level averot, and therefore that's this. And he says Beruria, who says Beruria was right? Maybe Beruria doesn't have chelek le'olam haba even. Who says that she was right? Which this opens a room to questioning what exactly happened with Beruria. Did she actually do the avera or did she not do the avera? So I will explain to you the two basic things. Starting with the Ben Ish Chai. The Ben Ish Chai writes in Ben Yoyada, in our sugya, right over here, the Ben Ish Chai says, Chas v'shalom, to say that Beruria was over an avera. Chas v'shalom, to say Rabbi Meir tested his student. What's your heter to test your student? And he's going to go and speak about Tashmish Amita with the Eshed Ish. What's the heter to do that? Maybe some thought is going to come to his mind once he's doing this over and over and over, like Rashi says over here. What's the heter? And also, how in the world did Beruria commit suicide? Last I checked, if you do suicide, you're not buried even in a Jewish cemetery. It's not mutar to do that. So it says that those are three questions that the Ben Ish Chai asks in Ben Yehoyada. So Ben Ish Chai says a very, very creative answer. Very creative. He says, no, must be that this Talmid was not a regular man. He was a saris, a person that is missing regular basic male hormones, that therefore he does not have any thoughts. A saris, right? Doesn't have any yitzhara, he doesn't have any thoughts, nothing. He looks like a man, but he's not a man. And therefore, it is not a lifnei velo titel michshol for him to do it. And on her side, chas v'shalom, he didn't want him to do an avera. He just had to convince her to do something that would be considered not sniut. His example is that he would come to a private bathhouse that she would be bathing in. And as soon as she agreed with it, he had to reveal himself that I am a Talmid of your husband put me up to this, and you lost. That's what Ben Ish Chai says. And she was so upset and embarrassed and ashamed from the fact that she lost to such an nisayon. What if chas v'shalom he was a man? What if chas v'shalom something would have happened? She was so ashamed that she went crazy. Nitrefadato. She went crazy, and out of craziness, she chanka atzma. She did what she did. So therefore, she does have chelek l'olam haba because she was not mentally okay when she did it. And that is considered not being, Rav Moshe Feinstein has a tshuva. He writes, Rahman litzlan, a person that commits suicide by dropping themselves from a height, right, from a bridge to the water, whatnot, says those people, you could bury them in a Jewish cemetery. Why? Because it's for sure that they did tshuva on the way down. Right? Between the act and the death, there is enough time that you could assume they did tshuva there, thought of tshuva. Right? If somebody did something immediate, that's a different story. Right? So it says, the Ben Ish Chai, she was not bedat tzlula. She did not have clear mind when she did it. Therefore, she's also answered her question. So also, this is a very dachuk, a very creative, let's call it, answer of the Ben Ish Chai in Ben Yehoyada. But I think we could do probably better. So let's do a little bit different. The Rabbi Yaakov Ades Shlita, which many of you have seen him when you go to Kotel HaMa'aravi, a tremendous Talmid Chacham. He's the son of Rabbi Yehuda Ades. He has authored many tremendous works of Torah. A very interesting personality. He writes in Divrei Yaakov, in his Sefer, his conversation with Rabbi Elyashiv, alav shalom. Says that he went to Rabbi Elyashiv in the year of Tafshin Ayin Gimel, so 10 years ago. He went to Rabbi Elyashiv, and they were schmoozing. And from one thing to another, it came question of this Gemara. How in the world did Rabbi Meir do this, and did Beruria do that, and the Talmud did this? And he said, Rabbi Yashiv looked at him, and he said with absolute confidence, he said, Lo haya velo nivra. This never happened. Rabbi Yashiv said. So says Rabbi Yaakov Ades, what he meant is, he felt that this Rashi, who has no source in Chazal, none, no Midrash, no Yerushalmi, no Bavli, nothing, no Zohar, so this is a mistake that has been entered in Rashi, and that's the end of it. So it's not, this never happened. Now he's not the only person that says that, really in a different segment of Klal Yisrael. Another one of the Talmidei Chachamim, in his Shelot Utshuvot, Henkin's grandson, Shelot Bnei Banim, Chelek Dalet, he writes the same thing. He says, it makes no sense that this ever happened. It does not follow the patterns of halacha in any shape, way, or form, and hence he says, this has been edited later on, or it has been a different story that has been attributed to Rabbi Meir and the Beruria, and hence it has no validity in historic facts or in legitimate mefarshei ha-Talmud of the explanations and the commentators of the Talmud. So that's one way of looking at it as well, that this is not a legit way of looking at it. Now, there is perhaps one more thing that I want to say in Shalshelet HaKabbalah, mentioned earlier, that Shalshelet HaKabbalah writes that Beruria wrote in her Sefer, that Chutz mi Beruria, and so on. Shalshelet HaKabbalah says that's why she was melagleg al divrei chachamim. Even if you want to take it seriously, says she was melagleg al divrei chachamim, and once you make fun of divrei chachamim, it's like Shlomo HaMelech, you're playing with big fire. Right? If you do that, you could become a min, v'afikores, based on, Rabbi Meir himself says, man hanulan rabanan is a min. So therefore, Rabbi Meir, he doesn't say that, but I'm saying maybe Rabbi Meir l'shitato, he had to definitely change that, because that's afikorsut. To doubt something that Chachamim say, it will be considered minut v'afikorsut. So therefore, he had to change it. I'm adding that part myself. Says the Shalshelet HaKabbalah, therefore Rabbi Meir was obligated to change this, and nothing happened. Rabbi Meir actually played the part of this Talmid in the main way, and therefore he says it was Rabbi Meir himself in disguise and not a Talmid. So that's another legitimate sin. The last thing I want to discuss is Ramah Mipano. Ramah Mipano wrote the Sefer Gilgulim, right? He was a tremendous Mekubal. He was by extension a Talmid of Ari Kadosh, of course not in Eretz Yisrael, but he was considered one of the greatest names in the list of Poskim and Mekubalim. Certainly one of the top names in the names of Poskim who were Mekubalim, right? So writes the Ramah Mipano, and I typed up all these last night. I sent it to the chat for people who want to refer to it back. It was late at night, so it's a little messed up the typing, but that I'll fix it and send it again. But he writes a tremendous thing. Says the Ramah Mipano in his Sefer Gilgulim, he says, do you know who was Beruria a Gilgulav? Take a wild guess. We mentioned that the Midrash says in everything, he doesn't say it like this, but based on what we said, everything comes into a full circle, mamash from the Midrash that we mentioned in Mishlei, that Eshet Chayil Mimtza Zu Beruria. And who was Eshet Chayil written for, we mentioned? Rashi, take a look at Rashi there. Shlomo Melech is saying it on his mother Batsheva. Says Ramah Mipano, Beruria was a Gilgul of Batsheva, who just like Batsheva would give Musar to Shlomo Melech, who was the Chacham Mikol Adam, the greatest, wisest man in his generation. Beruria was giving Musar to the wisest man of her generation, Rabbi Meir. He doesn't say it this way, it's my additions, but it says, Rabbi Meir, we mentioned Gemara in Ruvin Daf Yud Gimel, that he was the greatest Chacham of his generation. His name was Nehorai, not Meir. Lama Nikra Meir, Shaya Meir, Ene Chachamim Betorah. He was the greatest Chacham. And she is giving him Musar. Same exact thing. And says Ramah Mipano that Talmid was the Gilgul of Uriah Chiti, and because she caused in indirect way, she caused the death of Uriah Chiti. Batsheva was the cause of the death, indirect cause of the death of Uriah Chiti in the previous Gilgul. He in this Gilgul was indirectly the cause of the death of Batsheva, the Gilgul of Batsheva, who is Beruria. And says the Ramah Mipano in such an unbelievable way, this was closing a circle from hundreds, if not thousands of years before, coming back to a complete picture from before. Of course, he explains all of those details that we mentioned. That's why I mentioned this at the end. You have all of those things, but you want to know why this came about in such an unfortunate way. Even if you do take Rashi seriously, says the Ramah Mipano, it was really closing a chapter on something that was opened many years ago. There's so much musar that the person could learn from this. First of all, a person should never ever trust themselves thinking they're above it. It never happens. It will never be. Secondly, how much respectful we have to be to Divrei Hachamim. Thirdly, a person should be very careful when you test people, And of course, above all, I think, is the realization that what goes around comes around. You start a chapter, you do something questionable, you do something even by, not directly, even not consciously, subconsciously, you cause something indirectly, and it goes around and around until it comes back. At some point, at some time, El emunah ve'en avil, tzaddik ve'yashar hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's justice is so fantastically phenomenal that it comes back to full circle, to full picture in an unbelievable way. Something to learn from in these days of holy days of Elul. And Bezrat Hashem will continue this in the days to come.